Ethan and Nora are 29 years old. Same salary, $71,000 a year. Same bank, Denver. Same bank balance the week they both needed a new car, $11,200 sitting in savings. Ethan bought his car with a loan. Nora leased hers. Fast forward 20 years, Ethan owns a 15-year-old car worth about $1,000 and hasn't made a car payment in over a decade. Nora has never owned a single vehicle in her life and just signed her 7th lease. Ethan's net worth from that one decision sits around $118,000. Nora sits around $104,000. $14,000 apart after 2 decades. One lump sum loan versus payments that never stop. That gap is a lot smaller than either side of this argument wants you to believe. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why. You've seen this debate 100 times. The buy side shows you a payoff date and calls it freedom, then quietly skips every dollar of interest, tax, and repair bill that happened on the way there. The lease side shows you a low monthly number and calls it smart, then quietly skips what happens when you're 65 years old and still writing a car payment every single month for the rest of your driving life. Both sides are telling you half the story because the other half doesn't fit their conclusion. This video runs the whole math, all 20 years of it, including the parts nobody puts in a thumbnail, the sales tax that gets financed and starts earning its own interest, the hidden interest rate baked into every lease called a money factor that almost nobody asks about, the insurance gap between owning and leasing, the fees waiting for you the day you turn in a leased car, and the maintenance bill that shows up the exact month your warranty ends. Most comparisons stop at year 3 or 4 because that's where one side happens to look best. This one runs all the way to year 20 because that's roughly how long these two people actually kept driving. And cutting the story short is exactly how both sides of this debate get away with an incomplete answer. If this is the kind of breakdown you actually want, the kind that shows its work instead of just picking a side, subscribe now. This channel runs the full math on the decisions personal finance content usually oversimplifies. No sponsor angle, no agenda, just the numbers. Here's the exact moment they split. Same week, same dealership lot, same trim of the same mid-size SUV. Sticker price $34,650. Ethan puts $4,000 down. With tax and fees rolled in, he finances $34,120 at 6.9% over 60 months. That works out to $673 a month for 5 straight years. Nora goes the other direction. $2,500 due at signing, a 36-month lease, $389 a month, 12,000 miles a year included. On paper, standing in that parking lot, both decisions look completely reasonable. Ethan is building equity in something he'll eventually own outright. Nora is keeping $284 a month in her pocket that Ethan doesn't have. Neither one of them is wrong yet. Here's what almost nobody mentions in that comparison. Ethan didn't just finance a car. He financed a car plus $2,772 in sales tax plus roughly $700 in fees. And every one of those dollars now accrues interest right alongside the car itself for 5 years. That's close to $500 extra in interest on top of interest, just for the privilege of not paying taxes and fees in cash up front. Nobody puts that number in a loan versus lease comparison because it doesn't fit neatly on either side of the argument. Meanwhile, Nora's $284 monthly advantage isn't free money either. It only means something if she actually does something with it, instead of letting it evaporate into daily spending, which is exactly what most people leasing a car tell themselves they'll do and then don't. Fast forward to year 3, the moment Nora's first lease is up. Run the numbers exactly as they happened. Ethan has paid $673 a month for 36 months, $42,428 total, including his $4,000 down payment. His loan balance is down to about $14,770. His car, 3 years old now, is worth roughly $21,500 on a private sale. Subtract what he owes from what it's worth, and he's sitting on about $6,700 in equity, plus the $7,200 he still has left in cash from his original savings. Call it $13,900 total, tied up in an asset he can't fully touch yet. Nora spent 3 years paying $389 a month, plus insurance, $523 a month all in against the $750 car budget she'd set for herself before any of this started. That left $227 a month she funneled straight into an index fund instead of spending it. At a 7% average return, compounded monthly for 36 months, that grows to about $9,070. Add the $8,700 she kept in cash after her signing fee, and she's sitting at roughly $17,800. All of it liquid, none of it locked inside a depreciating asset. At year 3, Nora's ahead by almost $3,900, and she doesn't own anything. That's the number that makes the internet declare leasing the winner and move on to the next video. What that clip never shows you is that Nora's advantage depends entirely on her lease payment staying where it is, and it won't. Ethan's number, meanwhile, is quietly baked into an asset that's about to start paying him back instead of costing him money. Don't move on yet. If seeing the actual math laid out like this is useful to you, hit like right now. It takes a second, and it's genuinely the only reason a breakdown like this finds more people. Before checkpoint 2, here's what's actually driving these numbers underneath the surface. 6 things almost no comparison video bothers to name. None of these show up on the sticker, the lease flyer, or the loan disclosure the way a payment amount does, which is exactly why they survive in every version of this debate that skips straight from a monthly number to a conclusion. First, the tax roll-in. Financing sales tax and fees instead of paying them in cash means you're paying interest on money that was never going toward the car itself. On Ethan's loan, that's close to $500 over 5 years, invisible unless you go looking for it. Second, the money factor. Every lease has a hidden interest rate dressed up as a small decimal, something like 0.00187, multiplied by a lookup factor most dealers hope you never ask about. Converted to an actual APR, and Nora's lease is running something close to 4.5% interest on the depreciation she's paying for. Over 36 months, that's roughly $780 she never sees itemized anywhere on her paperwork. Third, insurance. Financed and leased cars both require full coverage, but lessors often mandate slightly higher liability limits, and most advisors will tell you to carry gap insurance on a lease in case the car gets totaled. That's another $576 over 3 years that a cash buyer skips entirely, and a financed buyer only partly avoids. Fourth, lease end fees, a disposition fee. Excess wear charges, mileage overage if you go even a little over your allowance. Call it $1,000, sometimes more, every single time Nora turns in a car and signs another lease, which she will do again and again for the rest of this story. Fifth, the maintenance cliff. Ethan's warranty runs out right around year 3 or 4. Brakes, tires, a timing belt somewhere around year 7, and eventually bigger repairs that used to be covered for free. Average that out, and it's roughly $1,400 a year he wasn't budgeting for back in year 1. Sixth, opportunity cost. That $4,000 down payment, if it had gone into the market instead of into a dealership, it would be worth over $15,000 20 years later. Ethan didn't lose that money exactly, he just spent it somewhere you can't see on a monthly statement. Add all 6 of these together and they don't flip the outcome by themselves, but they explain why the gap between these two people is so much smaller than a simple payment comparison would ever suggest. Jump to year 10. Ethan's loan has been paid off for 5 years. Every month since, he's been redirecting that $673, minus rising maintenance costs, into the same kind of index fund Nora's using. Call his net investment around $583 a month for those 5 years. At 7%, that grows to about $41,000 in new investments, on top of a car now worth roughly $7,000, and the $7,200 in cash he never touched. Total, around $55,200. Nora is deep into her 4th lease cycle by now, and the cracks are starting to show. Every new lease she signs is on a more expensive car than the last one because vehicle prices haven't stood still for a decade. Her payment has climbed from $389 to something closer to $530 a month. That $750 budget that used to leave her $227 to invest now leaves her something like $74. Add up everything she's invested since year one, minus the lease end fees she's paid at every rollover, and she's sitting around $36,400. None of that is Nora doing anything wrong. It's just what happens structurally when your monthly cost is tied to a new car's sticker price every 3 years instead of being locked in once and left alone. At year 10, Ethan has pulled ahead by nearly $19,000. The free monthly cash flow that made Nora look smart in year 3 has been quietly shrinking every single lease cycle, while Ethan's cash flow, once his loan disappeared, only grew. But don't crown a winner yet. Ethan is still driving a 10-year-old car, and cars don't run forever. What happens to this MAF the day he has to replace it is exactly what the next 10 years are about to reveal. There's a version of this decision most people never consider: leasing for the first several years while you're building capital, then buying outright with cash once you've actually got it. No loan at all. That combined strategy deserves its own full breakdown. Subscribe so you don't miss the numbers on it. Now the full 20 years. Around year 14, Ethan's original car finally gives out, a transmission problem that costs more to fix than the car is worth. He pulls $19,000 out of his investment pot and buys a reliable replacement in cash, no loan this time. That single withdrawal resets the compounding clock on a chunk of his money right when it had the most room left to grow. He keeps investing what he can afterward, and by year 20, his portfolio, his current car, and his cash cushion together add up to roughly $118,240. Nora is 2 years into her 7th lease. Her payment is now $723 a month, almost double what Ethan's original loan payment was, for a car she will never own a single percent of. Her investable surplus most months is close to nothing, meaning her existing portfolio is largely just compounding on its own without meaningful new contributions, and some months it gets tapped to cover a lease budget that's run short. 20 years of compounding on what she managed to invest during the early, high surplus years still adds up to something real, roughly $104,600. $14,000 separates them after 2 decades and something like 240 separate car payments split between the two of them. Ethan owns an asset that could fail tomorrow and cost him thousands. Nora has never once paid for a major repair and has driven a nearly new car for her entire adult life. The dollar gap is real, but it is not the decisive verdict either side of this argument promised you at the start. And a meaningful slice of Ethan's number is tied up in a car and a portfolio he'd have to sell or draw down to actually spend, while a chunk of what Nora has left is simply cash that was never locked into anything, which matters a lot more than a single net worth figure lets on if either of them needed money fast. If that $14,000 gap after 20 years surprised you as much as it surprised me running these numbers, tap like before you keep watching. Let's be honest about buying's real risks, because this video has leaned toward Ethan for a while now. His entire advantage depends on discipline almost nobody actually has. Redirecting a car payment into an index fund the moment it disappears sounds simple and almost never happens in real life. Most people just absorb that freed up money into a slightly nicer lifestyle without noticing. His net worth is also sitting inside a physical asset that can fail without warning. A transmission or an engine can wipe out years of what looked like savings in a single repair bill, and he's carrying that risk alone for 2 decades. Liquidity matters too. Nora can walk into a dealership and drive away in a new car by that afternoon. Ethan would need to sell something first. Now the honest risks on Nora's side. Her costs are not fixed. They are rising on a schedule she doesn't control, tied to new car prices that have outpaced general inflation for years running. The predictability people love about leasing is really predictability that keeps climbing. She will make a car payment every single month for the rest of her driving life, full stop, with no finish line and no asset waiting at the end of it to show for any of it. Miles matter too. A new job with a longer commute, a move further from the city, any lifestyle change that pushes her over that mileage cap turns into real money at 20 cents a mile or more. Money someone who owns their car outright never has to think about. Here's the honest answer, and it is genuinely not the same for everyone. Buying clearly wins if you actually keep cars for 10 years or more instead of trading in every few years, because that's where the loan-free years do their real work. It wins if you will actually invest the freed-up payment instead of spending it, which you have to be honest with yourself about before you decide anything. It wins if your driving stays under roughly 12,000 miles a year without you forcing it, because that's the range where maintenance costs stay predictable instead of spiraling. And it wins if you've got enough of a cash cushion to absorb a four-figure repair bill without panic, because that bill is coming eventually. It's just a question of when. Leasing clearly wins if you value payment predictability over asset ownership, and you know that about yourself, not as a rationalization, but as a real preference. It wins if your mileage or your city or your job changes often enough that flexibility is worth paying a premium for. It wins if you genuinely hate dealing with repairs and would rather pay more to never think about a transmission again. And it wins if you're using the monthly savings for something with a higher return than a car ever gives you. A business, a down payment, anything that actually compounds faster than the gap between these two numbers. Neither Ethan nor Nora made a mistake. They made different bets on their own future behavior, and after 20 years, both bets mostly paid off. Here's the angle almost nobody runs the numbers on. What if you didn't have to choose one path for 20 straight years? Lease while your income is lowest and your flexibility matters most, then switch to buying in cash once you've actually built the capital to do it without a loan at all. That hybrid version might quietly beat both Ethan and Nora, and the full math on it is coming in the next video. But strip away every spreadsheet in this one, and it comes down to two questions you can ask yourself right now. Will you actually invest the difference, or are you being honest that you'll just spend it? And how many miles do you really drive in a year, not how many you think you drive? Answer those two questions honestly, and you've basically already made this decision for yourself. If this saved you from making this decision blind, hit like on your way out. Subscribe if you want more honest, math-first breakdowns with no agenda, and no sponsor picking a side for you. Down in the comments, tell me where you land. Team buy, team lease, or somewhere in between with a hybrid plan of your own. I read every single comment. Until the next one, run your own numbers before you trust anyone else's.